Ex-prisoners, is prison really like it's in the movies? A friend of mine went to prison and he told me about his experience. Apparently the biggest feeling he got was being bored. There's very little to do there, so he ended up working out a ton and actually got a certificate for computer repair. I guess they had some kind of opportunity for education. This is in Canada, and he said that there was a pretty big racial divide. There were white people, black people and Aboriginal people. The black people and Aboriginal people got along pretty well, but the white people segregated themselves quite a bit. I reckon it's different depending on the jail itself. Another thing he mentioned was the noise. After he got out, he didn't really listen to music, and always wanted to just chill. We played a lot of chess, and sat quietly for the first few weeks. He said that there was so much yelling and nonsense in jail and you don't really get to escape that. He is a pretty big guy, and apparently he got in one fight. He said that he didn't start it, but explained that if he had not fought then he would have been constantly harassed until he did, so he conceded, and beat the shit out of the guy who started it. He didn't get caught, and nobody bothered him after that. When he got out, he told me repeatedly that he would do anything to not go back, and that if he ever went back, he would likely kill himself. Unfortunately he has FASD, and started doing drugs again, got caught DUI, with drugs intended to sell. He's back there now, and I have no idea how to get in touch with him. It's been a few years now and frankly I'm scared to know.
That's a tough situation. Prison sounds pretty rough, especially the boredom and the noise. Your friend seems to have tried to make the best of it with working out and getting some education. The racial divide is interesting too. It's a shame he struggled after getting out. His feelings about returning are concerning, and it must be hard not knowing how he's doing now. Hope for the best for him.
Media gets a lot of procedural aspects of it right, but the atmosphere is decidedly less tense than Hollywood would have you believe. On Christmas morning one year I recall casually walking in the prison yard drinking a mocha and smoking a black and mild cigar, for example, conducting myself largely as I would at any holiday resort with medium security. I saw a dude stabbed to death over a lengthy phone call, but I also saw a bona fide prison wedding that was surreal beyond anything I've seen on film. Mostly though, it's boring as fuck and a complete waste of time, money, and human potential. That part of it tends not to jump off the screen, so it's often omitted in artistic works.
This gives a different perspective on prison life. It's interesting how the media glamorizes it, while the reality can be pretty mundane, or even absurd. The mix of everyday moments and extreme violence is unsettling. But yeah, the general boredom and wasted potential are overlooked in most portrayals. It's a reminder that life inside is more complicated than what's often shown.
It depends entirely on where you are. Overcrowded gang-infested state prisons where people carry shivs and you associate with people outside of your race at your peril? Yes, those exist. Dull county lockups where everyone is serving less than a year for low-level offenses and are no more violent than a typical high school. Those exist too. Violence ranges in severity but is less often of a sexual nature than portrayed. In the county lockup where I've been, fist fights were not uncommon and were usually mutual. Stealing from another inmate or being in for charges involving sexual offenses against children might get you beaten, but otherwise it was easy to avoid violence. Rape would have been completely unheard of. If anyone had a weapon, I doubt anyone did, it was because they were paranoid and stupid, not because they were hard. This was my experience from a few months at a rural-ish county lockup where a lot of the prisoners and guards knew each other from high school. Throw a bunch of regular blue-collar guys in their 20s and 30s into a pen together and there's going to be a little friction sometimes, but no one is getting raped or shanked. That's probably most county jails. Two unusual things that are more common in real life than on screen. 1. Prison burritos. A lot of guys like to make weird junk food loaves from various junk food sorta mashed all together and call it a burrito. Apparently this is a nationwide thing. Prison haggis would be a more accurate term for it. 2. Spades. I have never played or seen anyone playing spades outside of jail. If I did I'd probably assume they've been to jail, because the card game is big in jails.
This gives a pretty clear picture of life in different kinds of prisons. While violence can happen, it seems more about managing relationships and staying out of trouble.
I was in a minimum restricted prison and it was not bad at all. It was 2 levels above the lowest security, nothing I imagine like the maximum. I mean we had our own rooms with doors we had keys to, private showers and toilets, could order tea versus etc. There were fights occasionally, but they weren't bad. Imagine a dorm with a lot of older, mostly undesirable, mostly uneducated men with big egos and a curfew. The prison I was at had a medium and maximum prison on the same grounds, and it kept everyone in line pretty much. People were scared to go to the high side experience Sterling Correctional Facility. Sterling, Colorado. 2015-16.
The environment doesn't sound too harsh. Having private rooms and amenities like showers and TVs suggests it was more like a controlled living situation than a typical prison. It's interesting to hear about the social dynamics with older inmates and their attitudes. Overall, it seems you had a unique experience there.
I was in Texas State Prison for 2 years. It was definitely not as bad as the movies portrayed. Bad stuff happens, just not as common as movies portrayed. The whole 2 years, there was only one rape. The fighting is common but mostly organized to not have riots break out. It's not easy to get as much stuff in and out nowadays. I've thought about doing an AMA LOL. Crazy shit, but not as bad as the movies for sure. I could go on all day about things. I was in a medium security facility, higher security due to everyone being either murderers/sex offenders/huge drug dealers, probably the most simplistic I can make this post.
It's interesting to hear your take on prison life. Seems like a lot of what people think is exaggerated. Organized fights and the rare serious incidents paint a different picture than the one in movies. Your experience could definitely shed light on what really goes on. An AMA sounds like a good idea if you're up for it. It could open up some good conversations.
Not a prisoner, but I've worked in them, UK. People who are mad feel they need to prove something, nobody else rises to them, so they bang heads with other people are mad feeling like they need to prove something. Usually they're younger guys who are struggling. If you're in a drug-heavy area, you have a lot of people in for drug crimes. Dealers and users. This is a bad idea. Don't run your prisons like this. A lot of the violence in these prisons is somebody owes somebody something, usually money, and a sock of batteries in the morning will fix that. 99% of what a prisoners go through is boredom. Rape is almost non-existent, but I have heard of it being higher in other prisons. Mainly, most people in prison want to keep their head low and clock the time they need. It's not worth attacking someone when you've got 4 months left and he's got 6.
This gives a look into the realities of prison life. The struggles of young inmates, and the role of drugs create a challenging environment. Most inmates seem to focus on survival, keeping low profiles instead of getting involved in fights.
Never been a prisoner, but did have interesting visits while working as a plumber's helper putting in boilers. First prison was a male prison, built in the early 1900s. The inmates there had to work the fields and farm a large percentage of the food supply. Believe it or not, the food was pretty good, especially the pizza. The trustees that worked the boiler room were pretty cool folks. But we did have them apparently steal some copper pipe from us, which was a clusterfuck because everything in the van had to be accounted for on the way out. One of them made the mistake of opening a steam valve he thought was off though, and ended up getting his arm blasted with steam, peeling a huge layer of his skin off instantly. Pretty gnarly injury. The other was a women's prison, medical unit. The food at this one was fucking awful. Hot water to drink because they had no ice, and hot turkey salad filled with gristle and bone. Ick, how they eat that shit, I couldn't. The guard that was assigned to accompany us told us on our way in that the inmates would make sexual advances at us, but if he saw us even say hi to them he would throw us out. And went on to say, even if you did manage to sleep with one somehow, this is a medical unit, so your dick would probably fall off a few days later. It was an interesting experience, certainly showed me that I sure as shit never want to end up locked in there though.
Seems like you've had some unique job experiences. The contrast between the two prisons is interesting. The male prison sounds like it had some decent food going on, even with the theft. That injury from the steam is pretty intense. The women's prison experience seems rough with the food, and that guard's comments were a bit much. Definitely a reminder of what you wouldn't want to deal with.
I'm not a prisoner, but I am a CO and according to the inmates a pretty good one lol. Anyway, I take time to talk with the inmates pretty often and their main complaint is boredom. They have cable TV on 50-inch flat screens, board games, cards, movie nights all weekend with popcorn, phones in the common area, radios, a library, pretty much everything you have on the outside other than video games and freedom. In the past 2 years I've seen a handful of fights, usually in the medium security wing which is the most populated. The reasons for the fight seem to be 50-50 between someone ripping someone off and someone talking shit. I have never seen or heard about any rape, though we do have some inmates that are more than willing to put out for anyone who wants some. The things you see on TV and in movies are almost total fiction. I actually stay in contact with a bunch of other COs that I went to the academy with, and we all swap stories. Most of them are about stupid things inmates do, sometimes about fights we had to break up. Funnily enough, it's the smaller inmates that tend to get the most violent with us. The larger ones have a mutual respect thing with the staff, and a few have actually backed me up when someone got in my face. The women are the worst. Our female wing is like middle school. They are constantly bickering and whining about everything. They argue with each other constantly. They argue with staff constantly. They are also the most likely to attempt to smuggle drugs and other contraband. I once had to pull a 95-pound girl off of another CO. I picked her up and put her on the floor, then told her to stay. She complied and pouted for 2 hours. DR being locked up is boring.
It sounds like your experience as a CO is different from what most people think. While there's some tension and occasional fights, the amenities seem pretty decent. It's interesting how the dynamics vary between the male and female inmates. The boredom factor seems to be a big issue for them.
Obligatory, not me, but my uncle spent 27 years in prison. According to him, he lived a life similar to Andy from Shawshank Redemption. What he explained to me is that the guards hated doing paperwork and he would offer to do it for them. This led to him being valuable to the guards because after 10 years he was the only one who was willing and knew how to do the paperwork the fastest and most correct. To give an example, he told me about rape on prison can be taken very serious. They had a rape happening and locked down the prison. The first person the caption grabbed was my uncle. The guards took the victim and rapist into this holding area. My uncle said standard protocol is to have them be separated at all times so not one can influence the other. When my uncle was being guided to the office to do the paperwork, there was a new officer who placed them about halfway across the room from each other. He told the officer with a stern voice that he was wrong and needed to fix them and get them into separate rooms, especially because they had rooms available to divide them. The office got pissed and was like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" and told my uncle to shut the fuck up. That's when my uncle said he went to the captain and the captain backed my uncle up and made the new officer look like a dumbass.
That's an interesting story about your uncle. Sounds like he managed to navigate a tough environment pretty well. Doing paperwork for the guards must have given him an unusual level of influence. It's wild to think he caught that officer's mistake and got backed up by the captain. That's a unique way to gain respect in a place like that.
That human potential part really gets me. My brother is a very creative and artistically talented guy who ended up going to prison for 4 years. The entire time he was there he tried different things to scratch that creative itch and keep stimulated. He spent a lot of time writing, he made pretty prolific letters and sent them out to all of his relatives. He would also draw quite a bit, but what struck me as the most curious was that he would fill notebooks and notebooks full of website design and ideas. He also did a bit of music writing and guitar playing. The problem with that where he was serving time was that there was only one room available to the whole facility and you had to sign up to use it. Naturally, in an overcrowded prison it was tough to get a turn. For my brother, while he wasted years of his life in prison, I like to think that his experience helped him not to waste any of his remaining time.
Sounds like your brother used his time in prison to stay active and creative. It's interesting how some people find ways to channel their talents, even in tough situations. Writing letters, drawing, and working on website ideas seems to have kept him engaged. It's good to hear that he turned his experience into a way to make the most of his life afterward. Hopefully, he finds more opportunities to express himself now.
I'll reply to this comment because your situation sounds really similar to one that a relative is in right now. What do you want to hear from friends and family when we call/visit? I have talked on the phone a couple times with my relative. She's been in since this summer, has a year and a half left, and I'm always nervous that I'm going to say something that brings her down or that sounds condescending. She's still very young and I am sure that with family support she will get back on her feet after her sentence is up, but I have no idea what I can do to express that support right now.
Being there and listening often means a lot more than any words. Just show that you care and are willing to support your relative without judgment. It's important to be genuine, and letting her know you're thinking of her can help. A simple check-in or asking how she's feeling can go a long way.
You want to know why people were scared of the high side? Well, I watched a documentary on that prison like 3 days ago. There are like several gangs, gang wars, sex offenders, murderers, weapons, you name it. Well, also there is ad seg, which is like solitary confinement. There is even an electric fence that will either kill you or knock you down based on if you touched it first or second. That is around the whole prison though. It was very interesting, but didn't go much into the medium section. There is a special program where you can train dogs and get benefits on the medium side, I know. The insight on the medium section was good info to know, thank you.
That's an interesting view on the prison system. The gangs and conditions sound intense. Solitary confinement and the electric fence really add to the fear factor. It's good to have some insight into the medium section too, especially with the dog training program. Seems like there's more to it than just crime and punishment.
Friend of mine went to juvie, Jesus, about 13 years ago now. Similar story, good food, few movies, sports outside as an option, but there was also an indoor gym. He wasn't fat when he went in, but he came out ripped. Not to mention he learnt a bunch of new trick. First 48 hours he was out, roughly 15 years old, so we had the option to do some of our lessons in college instead of school. He was up at his college lecture and during lunch he went and stole an approximate 500 in cash. He left cards, wallets, purses etc. in the coats he took this cash from. He then proceeded to town, bought a brand new wallet, took it to the playing field, threw it in the mud and battered it. He took a few random cards for people's services like painters and put those cards in said wallet. He then put 400 something in the wallet and this fuck took that wallet to the police station and handed it, saying he found it. Just a FYI, in the UK, if you hand something in, and it isn't claimed, you get to keep it after X amount of days. So essentially he handed in a wallet no one was looking for, with an amount of cash no one was looking for, as the college money they knew to total around 500. The best thing about it? He was telling the whole class about this conquest and a group of girls went straight to the headmaster. Funny enough, 13 years later, we both started the same university, in the same year.
That's quite a story. Your friend clearly took his time in juvie to build himself up, both physically and mentally. Funny that you both ended up at the same university after all this time. Just goes to show how small the world can be.
We had cells at our county jail and prison, but one of my cellmates was a loud snorer. He got evicted. Which means 2 or more other cellmates to get on the kiosk and say this guy was inciting violence or something, and the guard comes and moves him to another cell or sometimes another dorm. He doesn't get in trouble or anything. Pretty shitty, but these people are going to be there for a while and sleep is priority number 1, nobody wants to be awake, bored out of their minds. It's also better than beating on them.
It's interesting how they handle issues like that. Sleeping is important in a place like that. Makes sense to find a solution without conflict. People just want to get through their time as peacefully as possible. Evicting someone for snoring seems odd, but I get it. Better than making a bigger deal out of it.